Hello Focus Fabs, I'm Andrea, your trusty ADHD coach. Welcome to my channel where we support women with ADHD and learn all about living with your handy dandy ADHD brain. Before we get started, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more amazing content. So today I'm going to tell you the crazy story of my journey from being a scared, confused girl without an ADHD diagnosis to a confident, certain woman living with ADHD. So I was diagnosed with ADHD at 37. So a lot can happen from birth to 37, and that is the story that I'm going to tell you today. So I was born in Michigan in 1982, and I was kind of born into a bit of an interesting kind of situation. My parents had their issues, and were divorced by the time I was about 4 or 5 years old. And I lived with my mother, who had some substance abuse issues. So there wasn't a lot of emphasis on like routine or education or anything, which, you know, children really need. So that was really challenging for me, especially being undiagnosed with ADHD. So I was kind of I have combination ADHD. I'm inattentive and hyperactive. I was a really active kid. I was constantly moving around. I was always using my imagination, lots of imaginative play, things like that. I was a lot for my parents to handle, God bless them. They had their hands full with me. So there's this really famous story in my family called the cowbell story. And I'll tell it to you now. So my grandmother was born blind, and one day she was keeping no pun intended, she was watching, no pun intended again, my grandma was supervising me, and she tells the story of how she used to put a cowbell around my neck so that she could hear me around the house. They lived in this big old farmhouse, and she would say I would go to one cupboard and take all the dishes out of that one, and she would go and clean it up, and I would be in the next one taking like the bowls out. And it was like that all day. So she would listen to this cowbell and run after me all day. So that's just kind of a representative story of what I was like as a child. I was just all over the place. So I started school in the late 80s, and I tended for some reason to have like really old school teachers. I'm talking about teachers that started teaching like in the late 50s, early 60s, at a time when ADHD didn't really exist. It wasn't really a thing. It was just, they viewed it as bad kids, like really overactive children who were a pain in the butt. That's kind of how they viewed them. So I went into school not being able to really pay attention to what they were teaching, getting really easily distracting other kids. Daydreaming was another thing that I really did a lot of. And these teachers, they didn't really want to deal with it. They just didn't have the time, they didn't have the resources, and they really just didn't want to deal with me. And so I think for kids, that's when you know that someone sees you as like a problem, that's really like, it was really palpable, and it really affected me, and it really affected my self-esteem. And so like being a 7-year-old with low self-esteem, it's really sad. But I mean, that's the way it was, because I felt like I was a problem child, because that's the way they viewed me, and they labeled me as a problem child. So like, for instance, there's this memory that I have in school of, you know, the teacher is teaching, all the kids are paying attention, and I'm like sitting here with my head and completely immersed in a book that I really loved and was really interested in. And they, you know, were constantly like, Andrea, you know, come on, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And I just couldn't, and I didn't know why. I just had no interest really in what they were talking about. And even if it was something I was interested in, I didn't have the ability to pay attention to it. So I also was like really socially awkward. I didn't know how to talk to other children. I would try to talk to them, but I would say the wrong things. And so I didn't have a lot of friends, which like makes me kind of want to cry now to be a little kid with no friends. I didn't understand other kids, and like they would make fun of me a lot for being, for not paying attention, or for being, a bad in class, or for being poor, things like that. And that's something that kind of continued throughout a good chunk of my life. So kind of moving on to middle school, I moved in with my father, which was a fantastic thing for me because my dad was just much more stable. There was just more routine involved in my life at that point. He really provided that for me. And there was a huge emphasis on education with my father. He was working on his undergraduate degree at the time. And so we would sit and do homework together, which was something I had never done with my mother. My mother never even asked me if I did my homework. So this was really new to me, but I really, really enjoyed that routine with him. So I attended a new school, and I just kind of learned to fake it a little bit in middle school. I acted like I was a good student. I did my homework, even if I didn't do it perfectly, I at least like turned it in most of the time. I built good relationships with my teachers. I kind of was a suck up, I would say, but it worked. They liked me, and I became friends with a lot of really smart people. And so by default, people started kind of viewing me as one of the smart kids, which was great for me because, I really kind of wasn't one of the smart kids, but my grades actually, because of that, they did improve a little bit. So between, the routine and the, being closer with my teachers and really kind of putting more effort in, I did relatively well in middle school. So like moving on to high school, I, continued to have a consistent routine. Dad and I would study together. At this point, he was working on his master's degree. My grades went up. I was still friends with smart kids, and I really tried to like compete with them to get better grades, and it worked. I did really well. I was still really socially awkward. I didn't know how to talk to people. I just never really learned how to do that at that point. I think I realized that I was just afraid that they would see that there was something wrong with me, which I obviously now I know is ADHD, but I was afraid they would see that. And so I just kind of stayed away from other people that I didn't really know. So I was terrible at math. I just didn't understand it. I remember being in algebra, I think it was algebra 1 or something. And I think we were working on like an equation, I think that's what you would call it. And the teacher, I remember, would tried to get me to understand and help me to understand equations and the way they work and the formula and whatever. And my brain didn't grasp it. And so the teacher at one point was like, Andrea, I can't do anything else to help you understand this. And I just took that internally and turned it into I'm stupid, I'm not smart, I'm not intelligent, I can't do this. And it was really just debilitating to me and so damaging to my already really low self-esteem. So I could read really well, but I would have to read things over and over and over again in order to absorb the information that I was reading. And it was, that's still something that I struggle with. So moving on to college, I actually got into a really good university. I was so excited. I could not wait to start my life. I was going to get my degree and become a teacher, and it was just, everything was looking up, and I was I can do this, and I felt somewhat capable. So first week in college, I get diagnosed with mono. Of all things. It was awful. I was really sick. This was in 2000, so this was pre-cell phone. Internet was not what it is today. So there was really nothing for me to do but study. And that is all I did. I studied and studied and studied. So I got straight A's, perfect grades at this great university my first semester. Got better. Grades dropped a little bit as, more distractions rolled in. Once I was able to leave my room more, I met people and partied and did all the college stuff that you're supposed to do. And my grades dropped a little bit, but it wasn't terrible, and I was pretty happy with them. So my second year at the university, my life completely imploded. So my dad got divorced, and that destroyed all sort of semblance of normalcy that I had had in my life. It was ending, and I was like, what is happening? I didn't know what to do. And then, I was dating my first love, and he broke up with me, and I was devastated. So I was just too distracted to study. I stopped going to classes. I stopped taking exams. I just completely dropped out. I couldn't even deal, and I failed every single course I was signed up for. So that was awful. So I decided to leave the university and ended up having what I can only describe as like a mental breakdown. I just lost it. And I had no routine, no structure. And that was when I got my first diagnosis of depression, and started what became a long cycle of trying different antidepressants to find out what worked. Nothing ever worked, and I now realize that it's because I wasn't depressed. I had ADHD that was undiagnosed and unmanaged and caused a ton of depression and anxiety or depressive symptoms. So my life completely changed at that point. So post-college, I fell into just a series of menial jobs, things like bartending and serving, which I was really, really bad at. I would forget what people ordered. I would forget to bring things people would ask me for. And another thing is I didn't know how to talk to people. I was still super socially awkward. I don't know even why they hired me at a lot of these jobs, but I did it for a long time. I was barely making ends meet, which, is terrible. I had no routine, no structure in my life whatsoever. I had no goals. I had no destination. I was just surviving at that point, which is kind of would become a theme in my life, just surviving. I got really depressed. My anxiety skyrocketed and was just completely out of control. And now I realize that I felt anxious and depressed because I felt like I just knew there was something wrong. There was something missing, and I just didn't know what it was. So around 2005, I met a boy, and I fell just completely head over heels, madly, deeply, crazy in love. And he was coming to Atlanta, Georgia to start grad school, and he asked me to move with him. I was really scared, but I came, and it was really a crazy time for me because I was uprooting any semblance of normalcy that I had to transplant myself into a completely new city and state. So it wasn't long after we moved here that we started fighting about my lack of goals and my lack of focus. And I couldn't explain to him why I didn't have those things. It just turned into these huge fights, and eventually we broke up, and I was extremely sad and depressed about it, but decided to stay in Atlanta and make a go of it. So not long after that, really soon after that, I fell into nannying, and I was really, really good at it. For the first time, I was good at something. And I think it was just because there are no 2 days that are the same when you're caring for children, because they will throw everything they have at you, and you have to stay on your toes. And with ADHD, that's, novelty and excitement is so important, to our brains. So, another great thing about my career as a nanny is my first boss taught me so much about organization and prioritization and just how to live like the kind of life that I wanted to live. She lived that kind of a life, and she was just a great influence and example to me. So I learned so much from my first nanny position. I was able to support myself for the first time in my life, which I wasn't used to. It was a great feeling to be able to pay the bills and to go on trips if I wanted to and things like that. I felt like even though I was really enjoying my job, I still felt like, there's something else that I'm supposed to be doing, but, I didn't know what it was. And I figured that I'm young. Eventually I'll get myself together. I'll figure it out. It'll happen. I thought that's the way it would work out. So I met my husband about 13 years ago, and I met him while I was still nannying, and just fell completely in love with him. And he was ambitious, determined, and just so generous. He had really high expectations of me. And I felt a lot of pressure to meet them. So he didn't really understand why I didn't have goals and for myself, and I didn't really understand either. I couldn't tell him. I made so many promises to him that, yes, I'll try harder. I'll try this. I'll try. And I really did try, but there was just like a disconnect. I was constantly caught in like the planning stages of things. I couldn't move past that, and it caused so much conflict between us. Like, he loved my kindness and my genuineness, but he didn't love the things about me that were ADHD, even though we didn't know at the time that that's what it was. So my diagnosis came years after that. So one day, like after I think another yes, I'll try session, he said to me, I think you have ADHD. And I said, I think you're crazy. And then I decided to research it, and I did. And I was absolutely floored because every single symptom like described my entire life. And I was like, it can't be this easy. There's just no way that there's one thing that explains all these problems that I've had in my life. But it did. And so I decided to go get diagnosed and got my diagnosis. That day was like the best day of my life, but at the same time, it was also like the scariest day of my life. After, the best day after my wedding, but it was also like the scariest time ever. But I felt really validated. I felt like, finally there's an answer. I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew I wasn't stupid. I knew I wasn't like incapable. And it was just such a relief to have answers after a lifetime of just feeling like I wasn't enough. So I started medication, and along with the medication, I made the commitment to start changing the way I think about things and my habits. And it made a huge difference. So now I'm like, I have my dream job. I work for myself. I'm an ADHD coach. I adore it. I love my clients. My marriage is good. I mean, I'm so happy, and I'm just so grateful to have been diagnosed. And like, I view my ADHD as like a positive thing. It's not this awful thing that I have. And it's just been the biggest blessing for me. So I just want to kind of end this video by saying, there's hope, and you can have any kind of life that you want to have. It's up to you to create it. Thank you for watching my video today. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more awesome content. Stay focused, ladies.